Hey guys, so this Christmas I had the opportunity to purchase my very first DSLR camera. Unfortunately, I did get a little bit too excited, so I couldn't wait and do an unboxing. There's plenty of those on YouTube anyway, so I thought it would be useless, waste of my bandwidth, considering in Canada we're pretty much restricted with the amount of bandwidth we have anyways. So without much to do, the point of this video is, to highlight some of the things that I've learned being a first-time DSLR owner. Some of the things that will help other individuals like myself who are used to point and shoot cameras, just to get started with using a DSLR. The video quality for this video is quite bad since I am using my MacBook's internal webcam. The only other camera I have is my old point and shoot, which really only does 480p video, so it's gonna be quite bad with respect to video quality anyways. But I guess long as you can see the things and you can see what I'm doing and hear me, I think the video should be useful, or hopefully I hope it's useful for you. So although I'm not doing an unboxing, I'll quickly go over the equipment that I bought, just so you have an idea of what I'm working with. So of course, since I have been comfortable with Canon. I have had experience with this company before when I purchased my point and shoot cameras. So I decided to go with them over Nikon. And the camera I particularly chose to pick up was the Canon Rebel T4I. In other parts of the world, it's also known as the 650D, and it's a successor to the T3I or the 600D. So it's Canon's entry line series. Well, the most basic camera that Canon offers at the DSLR end is the T3. And then after the T3 comes the T3I and then the T4I. And then above the T4I is the 60D. And then, we get into the much more higher end cameras that run quite a bit. So the body for the T4I at the moment is around $649, if I'm correct. And the kit that I picked up, I did not pick up the one that came with the 18 to 135 millimeter lens. So my kit actually came with the 18 to 55 millimeter lens, which is this one right here. You can probably see it, 18 to 55. And in addition to that, I also picked up another lens, telephoto lens, which is from 55 to 250 millimeter, and it does come with image stabilizer. Now when you're shooting, especially with a telephoto lens, you want to ensure that you have image stabilization built into the lens. The main reason is when you're zoomed in completely, and you're taking the picture while holding the camera, not mounting on a tripod, little movements in your hand, will get picked up by the camera, and it'll cause blurriness in the picture that you take. So you want to ensure that you get a lens that has image stabilization. This is especially true in low light, because I'll talk about this stuff later, but once you go into low light situations, either your exposure you have to increase, which is controlled by your aperture, which I don't think this lens has can open up the aperture that wide to some of the more expensive lenses, so it doesn't allow that much light to come in. But I'll talk about all that later. So you either have the ability to change your aperture settings, or the ability to change your ISO, or your shutter speed. If you're looking at this video, you might notice that there's some grainy. The video is not that clear. It's a bit grainy. What changing the ISO does is it makes the sensor that's in the camera more sensitive to the light that's coming into the camera. But on the negative side, when the sensor is more sensitive to the light that's coming in, it also picks up noise. And this noise can be seen as graininess in the image you take, as well as the videos that you shoot. So the wider you open your aperture up on the lens, the more light that can come in, and the more light reaches the sensor that's in your camera. And once it reaches the sensor in your camera, then what you can do, what the camera does is, it processes that light and produces an image. And if there's more light coming in, you can set lower ISO settings. So you can make the sensor less sensitive to light. And in turn, the noise that you see will disappear. So you really want to ensure that you're getting the lens with, especially if you're shooting in low light conditions where light is already restricted. You want to ensure that the lens you're getting has a low aperture value, and this can be seen by the value right here. Let me turn my lens. Whoops. Right there. So this lens goes from 4.4 to 5.6. So as you zoom in, the smallest aperture I can put on this lens is a 5.6. But when I'm zoomed out, the smallest aperture setting that I can send is 4. So in this sense, this lens allows less light to come in when it's fully zoomed in than it does when it's fully zoomed out, having the aperture set to the widest setting possible. Since at zoomed out position, as I said before, the aperture, the widest value that you can set is 4. When it's zoomed in, the widest value that you can send is 5.6. So that's just something to keep in mind. But anyways, I'll get into that in a couple of, I'll probably make another video covering shutter speed, ISO, and the aperture. In this video, I just want to basically go over the camera itself and some of the basic features of the camera and how to do simple things, like attaching a lens. I found it, it took me a little time to even learn how to attach a lens on this camera, since I've never used a DSLR in my life. So I hope, by making this video, I can help some of those people out who are looking into purchasing their first DSLR or have just bought one and want to just learn, how to do simple things, such as change the lens or pick the right mode to shoot in their with their camera. So anyways, I'm going to start with that. So first thing you're going to notice when you obtain your camera, I've already put on straps. You might want to do that. I'm not going to go over that on the video, but yeah, anyways, the first thing you'll notice is that there's a lens cap on the camera. This lens cap, when you open it, what you see inside is your mirror. That mirror reflects the light into your optical viewfinder in the back. And when you press the shutter button, which is right here, what happens is this mirror flips up. And behind this mirror, you have your sensor. With the Canon T4I, the sensor is an 18 megapixel sensor. And the sensor is what will be sensitive to the light, and it is what actually obtains the image. It is what processes the image. So that's essentially how a DSLR works. You have a mirror, it reflects the light onto the optical viewfinder, and when you take your picture, you release the shutter, the mirror flips up and the sensor collects the light. And you'll see when you're taking pictures, especially with long exposures where you have long shutter speeds, when the mirror is flipped up, you can't see anything through your optical viewfinder. That's because it's not reflecting the light that comes in through the lens. And with this particular camera, since it's a lower end model, it uses a pentaprism mechanism in order to reflect the light. Now, higher end models such as 60D use a different mechanism, which allows more light to come into the optical viewfinder, and thus allows you to see brighter image in the optical viewfinder. But that wasn't really a problem for me. And I looked at it at the store, and it wasn't really that much brighter. Personally, I thought it wasn't that much brighter, so I didn't bother, paying a little bit more to go with the 60D. Also because this one I feel has a better video mode, so I chose the T4I for that reason as well. So once you've opened the camera up, remove the safety cover that's at the front, what you'll notice is that there's 2 dots on the top of the camera. There's a red dot and a white dot. If you're using the new lens systems, the EFS lenses, you'll notice that on your lens as well, such as this one, where is it? Right there. You can see that there's a white mark on the lens as well. And this white mark, to attach the lens, first of all, remove the safety cover off the back of the lens. And then, what you want to do next is line up this white mark with the white mark on your body that I just showed you, the white mark right there. So I'm just going to do that right now. And then all you have to do is turn the lens and you'll hear a click noise. And there you go. The lens is attached to the camera now. That's all you have to do. Now that the lens is attached, I'm assuming you've also entered the battery in. The T4I This battery cover is in the bottom. So you just push that back and flip open the cover. And as you can see, battery is already in my camera, but you probably have to do that yourself. And the SD card is on the right hand side of the camera. So just pull that back and flip over the cover. And there's an SD card right there. Now, when using a digital SLR camera, one thing that you should note is, to achieve the fast burst rates, the T4I, for example, can do up to 5 images per second. I think it's per second. Yeah, so anyways, it can do 5 shots per second when shooting in the RAW mode, or 5.6 if you're shooting in JPEG. And in order to achieve this, what you need to do, what you need to have is a fast SD card. When you're using a cheap point-and-shoot camera, you can buy a cheap SD card, ones that are class 6 or below, and it'll work perfectly. You won't experience any difference if you purchase a cheap SD card or if you purchase an expensive SD card. With the DSLRs, you need to have a fast SD card. Otherwise, what you'll notice is that your camera will not actually achieve a fast burst rate, since the camera has to write larger files onto the SD card. So typically what is recommended is that you purchase a class 10 SD card, or one that's faster than that even. The SD card I have in here writes at speeds of up to 45 megabytes per second, which is significantly faster than a class 10, which writes at 10 megabytes per second. So I thought I'd just let you know that. And these SD cards are pretty cheap these days anyways. I purchased a 32 gig one for around $20, which is not that big of a difference from a normal class 6 or class 10 SD card that you can get from a generic store. So once you have everything put in place, you'll notice that the T4i, one of the big differences between the T4i and the T3i is that it has a dedicated video mode. So the camera right now is in the off position, and to turn it on, simply flick the switch right here, and the camera should be on now. And at this point, you might also want to remove the lens cap. You won't be able to see anything in the optical viewfinder if the lens cap is on, obviously, because no light is getting into the lens, and therefore no light is going to be reflected into the optical viewfinder. So to remove the lens cap, you just take your finger, press on the lens cap with both sides, and just pull it off. As simple as that. And now you're ready to shoot with the camera. So obviously, since you can't see the optical viewfinder, and I don't really know how to show you it, I'm going to use the LCD screen that's on the back of the camera. So one of the things that the T4i also has that the T3i didn't have is that it has a multi-touch screen, and you can adjust it. You can rotate it, turn it around. You can orient it in whichever way is the most comfortable with you. And to actually turn the optical viewfinder on, you're gonna have to press this button right here. It's like a little, it's a little camera button basically. So once you press it, watch what happens. Bam, and the screen comes right to life. So once the screen is alive, here, I'll turn it towards your direction so you can see it. Once the screen is alive, to zoom in, you simply turn this big knob right here. This is the 18 to 55 millimeter lens. To zoom in and out, you turn basically this focusing ring. I don't know, zoom ring, I guess. I don't know the technical terms, but basically you just turn this ring, the big ring right here, this one right here, and you'll see that there's markings on the lens itself. So when you turn it, it tells you, what you're zoomed into. So right now I'm at 55 millimeters zoomed in, and if I want to zoom out, I just go down, and I'm at 18 millimeters now. That's the maximum zoom out that I can go to this lens. And another thing that you might want to take note of, is over here on this side of the lens. You'll notice that there's two things. Let me turn on light. There's light's not helping much. There's two things. There's a stability control right here, you can set it to either on or off. And then on top of that, there's also the autofocus and manual focus. Now, the 18 to 55 millimeter lens doesn't have a separate, a focusing ring that other lenses do. My other lens does. I'll show you in a second. So in order to to focus manually in and out using this lens, you essentially have to just twist this end of the lens. And it's essential that your lens is on manual focus. Right here, manual focus. Make sure it's on manual focus, or you'll ruin the motor that's in the lens. If it's on autofocus and you're doing the focusing, manually. Now, the other lens that I have, or those of you who picked up the 18 to 135 millimeter kit, you'll notice that your lens has two rings. One is your focusing ring, which is this big one right here. And as you can see, it has the markings once again, going all the way up to 250. And this lens also has a focusing ring that's right here. So to adjust focusing, you simply have to turn this ring. So two rings. This is for zooming in and out, and this is for focusing your lens. Focusing when you zoom that in at the right level. And this lens once again has autofocus and manual focus, as well as stabilizer on and off, because it is a stabilized lens with image stabilizer. Now it comes to different modes of the camera, but I'll go into that differently. So when you look at your camera, for the first part, first bit, like when you obtain your camera, you're going to want to stick in the green mode that's right here. That's your automatic mode. In this mode, the camera basically, adjusts the exposure settings, the shutter speed, ISO, and all the other elements automatically, as well as your flash. You have no control over flash in this mode. So I'll show you right now, actually. I'll switch to autofocus. Flash pops up by itself, and there you go. It took an image by itself. So essentially in this mode, your camera is just a point and shoot. So although this, this mode is good to start off with, you probably don't want to stick with this mode. You bought a DSLR for a reason. You want to be able to control things such as your aperture, your shutter speed, or exposure composition, all those things. You want to control them. That's the entire reason why you bought a DSLR. Otherwise, your cheap point and shoot camera, can do the same thing. You want that creative control, which is why you got a DSLR. So first of all, I would recommend you start off with the automatic mode, and the mode right underneath it, right underneath the automatic mode, if I can perhaps highlight it. It's the one right here. That is the no flash automatic mode. So in this mode, this mode is basically the same as the automatic mode, fully automatic, except that your flash won't fire. So if I were to take a picture again, you saw that the flash didn't fire that time, whereas in the first time the flash fired. So that's basically the only difference between the fully automatic, which is this mode, and automatic without flash mode. And you can see that the modes have to line up with the line. There's a white line on the body of the camera. The mode that you're in right now is the mode that lines up with that line. So that's how you know which mode you're shooting in. Now the mode underneath that is your creative auto mode. So in the creative auto mode, when you get into this, what you'll see is, here I'll turn my screen. The LCD is too bright. Anyways, what you'll see in this mode is that you have the ability to blur the background. That's one of the big things in this mode. And what you're doing when you're blurring your background is essentially changing your aperture settings, your f-stop. And when you have a small aperture number or small f-stop, what happens is that your camera's lens is open wide. And when your camera's lens is open wide, the depth of field is really shallow. So if you've seen images taken with a DSLR, you'll notice that some of them, the subject is very, in focus, but the background behind him, or the person who's standing, will be really out of focus. And this is good for a portrait type of image. And that's what Aperture does, and that's what this mode allows you to control. It calls it a background effect because, you know, this is not a fully manual mode or one of the more professional modes. So it wants to make it easy, you know, to understand the settings in the camera. So that's basically what background blur does. When your aperture is, you know, a large value, on the other hand, what happens to the lens is your aperture closes up. And when your aperture closes up, this has two effects. One is that less light is getting into the lens, so your times that shutter times are going to have to be longer in order to compensate for that less light entering the lens. And the second thing that happens is that your depth of field is very large. So you'll have your subject that's in focus, and your background in addition to the subject will also be in focus. So that's just one of the things that f-stop or Aperture does. Now, besides Aperture, Creative Auto, which allows you to change your aperture, it adjusts all the settings by itself besides Aperture, which you define. The next mode is your Portrait mode. And in the Portrait mode, what it does is it automatically sets the aperture to the lowest number. So your subject will stand out and your background will, you know, be blurry. And that's basically what it does. It'll set your lens's aperture to the lowest value automatically, which is good if you're taking a portrait, which is why it's called a Portrait mode. And the next mode is the Landscape mode. So in Landscape mode, what it does, it'll set your aperture to a low value, so your background is completely clear. In addition to that, it'll also disable the flash. Why would you not want to flash? Because flash isn't really going to help if you're capturing a landscape, right? So that's what the Landscape mode does. Now the next mode is the Macro mode, or close-up mode. So yeah, it just allows you to get close-ups with your, you know, camera. Now the thing is, you're gonna want a lens that has, you know, that allows you to get close and still focus. For example, if I was shooting with this lens starts at 55 millimeters, so I can't really get that close, you know, with the subject. I can zoom in and get close, but physically I can't move my camera close enough to the subject and focus properly. So that's one thing to consider when using that mode. Next mode is for objects that are in motion. What this mode does is it sets your shutter speed to really low, like a really low value. So watch what happens when I hold my shutter button. And I hit my buffer, so I can't shoot anymore. That was 5 frames or 6 frames. And I'm shooting in RAW, which is why the buffer filled up quite fast. I can do it again. I love shooting in this mode. Yeah, and the buffer fills up again. So that is your action mode. Then this is your night portrait mode. So it'll turn on the flash as well as increase the exposure times. It increases shutter times. So now this is a mode where downsides come in. Because your shutter times are increasing, if you were to use this mode, you know, handheld, if you were to handhold the camera and shoot with this mode, what you'll notice is your images are going to be very blurry. This is because the shutter time is slower than it is in other modes, which means that your camera exposes the sensor to light for a longer period of time. So if you vibrate or move your camera while the sensor is still collecting light, you're going to notice haziness. So you want to mount it onto a tripod. And this is one reason why I would recommend, you know, don't cheap out on the tripod as well. You want a tripod that's very stable. You do not want a tripod that's, you know, shaky, because in the end, if you're working with long exposures or images where there's a long shutter speed time, you're going to notice that your images are turning out blurry. This is because of tripod is shaking. I'll go over that in the next video that I make. That's going to be more on the manual modes that are on this side. Okay, so next mode is night scenery mode. My camera turned off. Okay, So what this mode does is it'll take 4 shots and then it combines those shots. The shots are at different exposures. And now it's going to combine them. And it'll take those 4 shots, combine them, and make a stable image. That's what the screen says on it as well. I haven't really used this mode, but I find that it also produces pretty blurry images if you're in a really dark scene. I don't have a tripod yet, so I can't really do anything about that. I'll show you a technique that that photographers use to minimize the amount of shakiness or to increase the stability that you have when taking pictures. The last mode for one of the basic modes is your HDR backlight control. So you use this mode to basically take HDR shots. It'll take 3 shots at 3 different exposures, and then it'll combine them, so you have a high dynamic range. You've probably seen the HDR pictures all over the place. This mode just does it automatically. So yeah, it basically made an HDR right there. That's all this mode does anyhow. Now, these are what we call everything up to the green marker, which is right there. All of these modes are called basic modes. They're modes where the camera adjusts most of the values itself. And although it gives you creative control, it doesn't give you full creative control that the modes down on this end do, such as the shutter priority, aperture priority, and the full out manual mode. So I'll briefly go over those actually. Hopefully this video isn't going too long. So first is the shutter priority mode. In the shutter priority mode, what you have an option to do is to set the shutter speed that you want the camera, to take pictures at. The shutter speed is right there. Wait. Shutter speed is right there for the camera. So right now I'm shooting at 1/40th, and I'll increase the shutter speed and decrease it to show you what it does. Okay, so I'm gonna set the shutter speed to something really fast, and watch what happens when I hold down the shutter button. Oh, whoops, my bad, I didn't actually set it. Okay. Really fast, right? And now I'm going to set the shutter speed to something very slow. And look what happens when I set it to something slow. Not too slow because it's still taking the picture. And now it's stopped. I'll set it to something even slower. You see how the shutter is getting slower and slower and slower as I change the shutter speed? I'll change it to something even more slower. You see how long that took for the shutter to open and close? So what this allows you to do is, let's say you're in a low light situation and your sensor isn't getting enough light. So when you set the shutter speed to something really low, it allows more time for light to get into the sensor, and thus you can capture an image while being in a low light situation without the usage of your flash. But once again, you want to make sure that when you're using a slow shutter speed, that you're on a tripod, because any vibrations that will occur with your hand will make the photo blurry, and that's usually a bad thing. You don't want hazy pictures unless you're going for that effect. So, fast shutter speeds are used when you want to capture, either motion, or you're in a situation where you have a lot of light and you just want to get the shot, right? You have an ample amount of light. That's when you use a fast shutter speed. Okay, so let's say you don't want to adjust the shutter speed. Another option you have in order to get the light into the camera, as I mentioned before, is controlling your aperture. And the AV mode is a mode that allows you to control your aperture. In this mode, what happens is your camera will control the shutter speed, you specify your aperture value as well as your ISO value. And yeah, so your camera will then take care of the shutter speed value. And aperture is the 4.5 right there. And this is touchscreen, so to access the values, you can just tap onto the Q right there. I don't want to click on that. Tap onto the Q right there, and then click on the aperture, and you can just adjust it to what you want. Now, I mentioned before, when you have a small aperture number, that means your lens, its aperture is going to be wide open. Your lens is going to be wide open, so it's going to allow the maximum amount of light in. But the downside to this is that your depth of field will be shallow, so only your subject will be in focus. Everything behind the subject is going to be out of focus, or the effect that's commonly known as bokeh. I hope I pronounced that word right. Now, on the other hand, when your aperture value is a high value, what happens is that your aperture is closed, so less light gets into your lens and into the sensor. But on the other hand, the benefit of this mode is that both your subject as well as the background and the foreground will be in focus. So more elements are in focus when your aperture value is low. So this allows you to have a bit of creative control over your pictures. And that's basically, in the most basic way I can explain what aperture is. Now, the next mode is the fully manual mode. In the fully manual mode, what your camera does is it tells you, okay, you go ahead. You determine the aperture speed, you determine the shutter speed, you determine the ISO speed, you determine everything. It gives you the full control over your picture. So you can express your creativity and take pictures that a typical point and shoot camera would not allow you to do. Since typical point and shoot cameras don't allow you to control things like shutter speeds and aperture and ISO, I believe that one did. But yeah, the other things, forget about them on a point and shoot. So that's what a full manual mode, allows you to do. It takes some time getting used to, getting the correct aperture, shutter speed, and ISO values. So the best way to learn how to use the DSLR is to, well, use it. Practice makes perfect. That's the only way to learn how to properly control aperture values, shutter speeds, and all that. I think I forgot to show you what one mode, the P mode, or the program mode, what that does. Program mode essentially is the same thing as an automatic mode, but what the program mode does is it gives you the values, the aperture value, shutter speed value, gives you them, and then allows you to change them for the shot. These values will only hold for that one shot though. Then they'll revert back to the settings that are recommended by the camera. So they're not permanent values as they would be if you were using the aperture priority, shutter priority, or manual mode. But it does allow you to change those values, which is why this mode, might be useful. So let's say you wanted to take a picture really quickly. So you just focus in, and it'll give you the values. So it gives me both of the values, and then I can press the Q button again, and I can change those two values, as well as the ISO and all that. So yeah, that's what it does, and I hope this video allowed you to get a little basic understanding of what a DSLR is and how to use the Canon T4I. Sorry once again for the terrible video quality. I don't have any other cameras to really record with right now that shoot higher than 480p, which I'm guessing is going to be worse than this. But if this video was useful, please click the like button and leave a comment. What kind of things would you like me to explore or cover in my next video? I'd really appreciate that. Thank you so much once again for listening, and I hope you learned a little bit about DSLRs. Oh, one last thing. To pop up the flash, click on the flash button right here and it'll pop it up. You can only pop it up in like the manual modes though. It's not going up. Why is it not going up? There. Yay, flashes up. And now it'll take a picture with the flash on. And to close the flash, just click it, and there you go.